Most people don't realize this, but watermelons weren't always meant to be food. Long before they became a sweet, juicy staple of summer picnics, they were something far more essential: tools for survival. The earliest watermelons grew in the harsh deserts of northeastern Africa. These weren't the bright red, refreshing fruits we know today. Instead, they were tough, pale, and bitter, with hard white flesh that no one would want to eat. If you sliced one open back then, you wouldn't find vibrant color or a sweet aroma. You'd find something closer to a survival ration, bland, firm, and uninviting. But what they lacked in flavor, they made up for in function. Hidden inside those thick rinds was water, clean, drinkable water. In an environment where rivers were scarce and heat was relentless, that made all the difference. Water wasn't just important, it was everything, and somehow, this strange, unappetizing fruit managed to store it. Because of that, early people didn't see watermelons as food. They saw them as containers, natural reservoirs, something closer to equipment than nutrition. In fact, they were often described as botanical canteens, a perfect way to carry water across dry, dangerous landscapes. Imagine traveling across an endless stretch of desert. The sun is beating down, your supplies are limited, and every step drains your energy. There are no convenience stores, no bottles of water, just what you can carry. In those moments, a watermelon wasn't just useful, it could save your life. Travelers would take these fruits with them on long journeys, especially across regions like the Kalahari and other arid zones. When thirst became unbearable, they wouldn't slice the fruit into neat pieces like we do today. Instead, they would break it open and crush the flesh into a watery pulp. Then they'd drink it. It wasn't refreshing in the way we think of watermelon now. It wasn't sweet or satisfying. But it was enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to survive. At that point in history, the watermelon wasn't something you enjoyed. It was something you depended on. Then slowly, something began to change. Around 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, people started paying closer attention to these fruits. They noticed small differences between them. Some were slightly less bitter, some were a little softer, most were still far from enjoyable. But a few stood out, and that's where the shift began. Instead of treating all watermelons the same, people began selecting seeds from the better ones, the ones that weren't quite as harsh or unpleasant. They planted those seeds again, hoping for similar results. Over time, this simple act, choosing the least bad fruit, started to reshape the watermelon itself. This process is what we now call selective breeding, but back then it was just observation and patience. There were no labs, no genetic tools, no shortcuts, just generations of people noticing patterns and making small intentional choices. And those small choices added up. Year after year, century after century, watermelons began to change. The flesh grew softer, the bitterness slowly faded, the texture became less rigid, more edible. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It took thousands of years, longer than most civilizations even last. Think about that level of patience. Entire generations of people worked toward improving something they might never fully experience themselves. They planted seeds, grew crops, and passed down the results, slowly guiding the fruit toward something better. Eventually, the transformation reached a turning point. Watermelons became soft enough to cut, tender enough to chew, and, most importantly, pleasant enough to enjoy. The fruit that once existed purely for survival started to become something else entirely. It became food. And not just any food, something people actually liked. From there, the process continued. Humans didn't stop once watermelons were edible. They kept refining them. They selected for sweetness, for color, for juiciness. Over time, the inside of the watermelon shifted from pale and bitter to the bright red sugary flesh we recognize today. What started as a survival tool was slowly turned into a treat, and when you really think about it, that transformation is kind of unbelievable. Humans spent roughly 4,000 years turning a desert survival resource into a dessert. Something that once existed to keep people alive in extreme conditions is now associated with comfort, relaxation, and enjoyment. Today, watermelon shows up at barbecues, picnics, and summer parties. It's sliced into triangles, blended into drinks, and served ice cold on hot days. People eat it casually without thinking twice. It's refreshing, sweet, and familiar. But that version of watermelon is the result of thousands of years of quiet effort. It carries a hidden history. Every bite you take is the end point of a long journey, one that started in some of the harshest environments on Earth, where survival wasn't guaranteed, and every resource mattered. There's something almost ironic about that. A fruit that once meant the difference between life and death is now something we eat without urgency, without need, just because we enjoy it. It used to be crushed and drunk out of desperation. Now it's sliced and shared for fun, and maybe that says something bigger about human progress. We take what we need to survive, and over time we reshape it into something that brings us comfort. We improve, refine, and transform the world around us. Not just to live, but to live better. The watermelon is just one example of that process. A quiet one, An easy one to overlook, but once you see it, it's hard to ignore. Because hidden inside that sweet red fruit is a story of endurance, patience, and change. A story of people who took something harsh and made it gentle, something bitter and made it sweet, and that contrast is what makes it so fascinating. Something that once kept humans alive at their worst, when they were exhausted, dehydrated, and crossing unforgiving land, is now just a simple pleasure, a snack at a picnic, which, when you really think about it, is pretty incredible.